humans were the laughingstock of the galaxy. Every advanced species in the Galactic Coalition knew it. The Krotal, with their towering forms and brute strength, thought humans were amusing in their fragility. The Zarnak, sleek and cunning, found the concept of human emotions like fear and grief hilarious. To them, death wasn't something to fear, it was a temporary inconvenience. Regeneration chambers, advanced cloning, and centuries of lifespan had made death a trivial affair for most of the galaxy. But humans? They clung to old myths about death, gods, and a dark figure called the Grim Reaper. In the grand halls of the Galactic Coalition, where diplomats from every corner of the galaxy met to discuss trade, territory, and war, humans were tolerated but not respected. Diplomatic courtesy was the term the Coalition members used when referring to humans, but behind closed doors, the laughter flowed. A Krotal general, leaning back in his seat, grinned at his comrades. "You should have seen them on Cassida Prime," he said, his voice booming with amusement. "Fought valiantly, but they dropped like flies. And they were praying. Can you imagine?" His companions erupted in laughter. "Praying to what? Their so-called gods of death?" A Zarnak diplomat sneered, her narrow eyes gleaming with contempt. "They have this ridiculous belief in something called the Grim Reaper. Some cloaked figure with a scythe who comes to collect their souls." She rolled her eyes. "Such primitive thinking." More laughter followed, louder this time, echoing through the chamber. The idea that a species would cling to myths about death in an era of technological advancement was beyond amusing to them. For the Krotal, who could regenerate limbs in minutes, and the Zarnak, who had perfected immortality through cloning, the concept of fearing death was as alien as humanity itself. Among them sat a human diplomat, listening, watching, and waiting. He sipped his drink quietly, letting the mockery wash over him like rain on a window. Humans had become adept at keeping their expressions neutral in the face of galactic derision. After all, they'd been here before. The universe thought they were fragile, weak, and insignificant. That was fine. But what these aliens didn't understand was that humanity's strength came from their understanding of something far deeper than muscle or technology. They understood mortality. Later, as the meeting adjourned and the aliens went their separate ways, the human diplomat met with his colleague, a fellow human officer stationed at the Coalition. "It's always the same," the officer muttered, shaking his head. "They don't take us seriously. They never will." The diplomat smiled faintly. "They think we're weak because we die. They think they're superior because they don't fear death. And they mock us for it," the officer added, bitterness seeping into his tone. "They mock what they don't understand," the diplomat corrected. His gaze grew distant. "But they will." The battle on the human colony of Zerus began like any other skirmish in the galaxy. The Krotal forces descended, confident in their overwhelming numbers and superior strength. Human soldiers, despite their advanced weaponry, were still no match for the alien juggernauts. The first waves of humans fell quickly, their screams barely registering to the Krotal, who marched forward with brutal efficiency. For the invaders, this was just another routine conquest, a display of dominance over a lesser species. As the battle raged, human forces scrambled to maintain order. Commanders shouted over the chaos, trying to rally their troops, but it was clear that the fight was a losing one. In the center of the chaos, a Krotal officer sneered as he watched the human defenses crumble. "Is this all they have?" he muttered to one of his soldiers. "They're barely worth the effort." And then, something changed. It wasn't noticeable at first, just a flicker in the periphery. A shadow, moving through the battlefield. One of the Krotal soldiers paused, blinking as if trying to clear his vision. But before he could react, he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. His comrades barely noticed. They assumed he'd been hit by a stray human bullet. But then another Krotal soldier dropped. And another. No gunfire, no visible wounds. They simply stopped. Panic started to ripple through the alien ranks. "What's happening?" a Krotal lieutenant barked, his voice tinged with something unfamiliar, fear. The humans, still retreating, noticed the change in their enemy. They could see the confusion spreading among the Krotal. That's when they saw it. A figure, cloaked in black, moving silently through the chaos. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, a strange afterimage from the explosions and smoke. But then they saw the figure clearly, a tall, hooded being wielding a scythe that gleamed with an otherworldly light. It moved with deliberate purpose, cutting through the alien forces, though it didn't swing the scythe in a traditional manner. No, it didn't need to. Wherever the scythe pointed, death followed. The Krotal soldiers began to fall in greater numbers, collapsing as though their very life force had been extinguished. The humans were just as bewildered as their enemies. This wasn't any military tactic they had been trained to expect. "Is that?" one soldier whispered, too afraid to finish the thought. Another soldier, eyes wide, simply nodded. "It can't be," he murmured. "But it is." The Krotal commander, now in a full panic, ordered a retreat, but it was too late. His forces were being cut down by something they couldn't see or comprehend. They tried to fire at the figure, but their weapons seemed useless. Bullets, lasers, and plasma all passed through the cloaked being as though it wasn't there. In desperation, one Krotal warrior threw himself at the figure, hoping to engage it in hand-to-hand combat. He never even got close. Before he could reach the figure, he froze, his eyes wide with terror, before collapsing to the ground, dead without a mark on him. By now, the Krotal forces were in full retreat, stumbling over their dead in their haste to escape. But no matter how fast they ran, the figure followed. The humans watched in awe as the Grim Reaper, the embodiment of death from their myths and nightmares, stalked the battlefield, claiming the lives of their enemies without mercy. In the aftermath, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The surviving humans stood among the bodies of the Krotal, still trying to process what they had witnessed. The Grim Reaper was gone as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving only the dead in its wake. Whispers spread quickly among the human ranks. "Did you see it? It was real! The Reaper, it's with us!" The soldiers, who had been on the verge of defeat, now felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. They had survived, but at what cost? What had they unleashed? Meanwhile, aboard the retreating Krotal ships, the fear was palpable. The Krotal commander, trembling with rage and fear, slammed his fist into the console in front of him. "What was that?" he demanded, though no one could answer. The tales of the battle spread like wildfire through the Krotal ranks, and soon, across the galaxy. The Reaper had been a human myth, something to be mocked. But now it was something real, something the galaxy had to fear. The Galactic Coalition, upon hearing the reports, dismissed the initial accounts as exaggerations or human propaganda. But as more and more Krotal survivors told the same story, the Coalition began to realize that this was no mere myth. The humans, with all their weakness, had something far more terrifying on their side. Something even the most advanced species couldn't understand or stop. The whispers of the battle on Zerus spread faster than any official report. Across the galaxy, word of the Grim Reaper began to seep into every corner of civilization. It started as rumors among soldiers, stories told in hushed tones in mess halls and barracks. At first, many dismissed it as nothing more than human superstition, a convenient myth to explain an unexpected victory. But the survivors' eyes told a different story. The Krotal warriors, once fearless and indomitable, returned shaken, their pride shattered. It wasn't long before the rumors turned into something more concrete. Other battles followed, smaller skirmishes between human forces and alien fleets, and the same strange phenomenon occurred. Alien soldiers who laughed in the face of human resistance suddenly found themselves faced with an invisible, unstoppable force. Ships and outposts, once secure in their technological superiority, reported entire platoons falling dead without a single shot fired. The survivors whispered a single name in terror: the Grim Reaper. In the halls of the Galactic Coalition, the tension was palpable. The Krotal, who had once mocked humanity for their frailty, now held emergency meetings. The Zarnak, who had never feared death, suddenly found themselves unsettled. Even species who had never engaged with humans began to take note. "What is this Grim Reaper?" they asked. Was it a human weapon? An AI? A new form of warfare that could turn the tide of the galaxy? Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed it was an advanced form of psychological warfare, humans manipulating the battlefield through fear. Others whispered that it was a secret human project, an autonomous AI designed to kill without leaving a trace. But the truth was far more terrifying. No one knew what the Grim Reaper was or how to stop it. The reports were too consistent to be mere coincidence, yet too bizarre to fit into any known category of warfare. Diplomats scrambled to make sense of it all. "We have no official record of any such weapon," a human ambassador would say, feigning innocence. But behind closed doors, humans knew the effect the rumors were having. They didn't need to confirm the Reaper's existence. Its legend was doing the work for them. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for so long, never expecting that their mythology would become the source of such widespread terror. And so, the balance of power began to shift. Where once humanity had been the butt of jokes, now they were viewed with growing fear and suspicion. Alien leaders who had once dismissed humans as weaklings now sought diplomatic overtures, anxious to avoid conflict. "We must reconsider our stance with the humans," a Zarnak official muttered to his council. "We cannot risk encountering this Reaper." It wasn't just the fear of death itself that shook the galaxy, it was the uncertainty of it. For species that had long conquered mortality through technology, the idea of an unseen force taking their lives without explanation was the ultimate horror. They could not fight what they did not understand. They could not avoid what they could not see. The very concept of death, long forgotten by the immortals of the galaxy, had returned in the most terrifying form imaginable. As the panic spread, alien cultures that had never believed in human superstitions began to adopt rituals they once mocked. Zarnak warriors, who had scoffed at the idea of gods, started carrying human trinkets, crosses, pendants, anything they thought might ward off the Reaper. Crotol soldiers, who had prided themselves on their invulnerability, now muttered prayers before battle. Some species even began to consult human religious leaders, hoping to understand the myths that had spawned the Grim Reaper. But there were no answers. The Reaper didn't operate by the galaxy's rules. It wasn't bound by technology or biological limitations. It existed in the space between myth and reality, feeding on the fear that had spread through the cosmos. For every alien species that had laughed at humanity, there were now countless more who trembled at the thought of facing them in battle. They didn't fear human soldiers. They feared the presence that followed them. Back on Earth, human leaders recognized the shift. They knew that their fragile place in the galaxy had been secured by something beyond their control. The Reaper wasn't something they could command or unleash, it simply appeared when needed, a force beyond understanding. And that made it even more powerful. In the Galactic Coalition, the mood had changed. The once loud, boisterous gatherings were now subdued, as alien diplomats carefully avoided direct conflict with the humans. They spoke in measured tones, their arrogance replaced with a newfound caution. No one wanted to be the next species to face the Reaper. No one wanted to risk the unknown. The human ambassador, the same one who had sat quietly through the mocking laughter of his peers, now found himself at the center of attention. He didn't need to say much. The fear in the room was palpable. "We never intended for this," he would say, his tone neutral, almost apologetic. "But the Reaper walks with us. It always has." The message was clear. Humanity, once dismissed as weak, now carried with them the most terrifying force in the galaxy. A force that no technology could counter, no biological advancement could overcome. The Grim Reaper wasn't just a myth anymore, it was real, and it was with them. As the meetings concluded, the alien diplomats left in silence, their minds racing. They had never feared humans before. But now, as they retreated to their ships and stations, one thought echoed through their collective consciousness. How do you fight something you can't see, can't understand, and can't stop? The galaxy was learning a lesson it had long forgotten. Death comes for everyone, even those who believe they are untouchable. And humanity, the species that had once been mocked for their fragility, now stood as the gatekeepers of that final, inescapable truth. The Zarnak fleet hung in orbit over Earth, a show of power that was meant to intimidate. They had spent months preparing for this assault, gathering their finest warships, equipping their soldiers with the most advanced technology. The mission was simple: crush humanity once and for all. End the rumors of the Grim Reaper. The Zarnak believed that if they could destroy Earth, the legend of the Reaper would die with it. They had never feared death before, and they refused to start now. The first wave of ships descended toward the planet, confident in their superiority. Earth's defenses were impressive by human standards, but the Zarnak fleet was unlike anything humanity had faced before. The aliens expected a swift, decisive victory. But as the ships entered Earth's atmosphere, something went wrong. Communication lines went dead. Sensors stopped working. The highly trained Zarnak soldiers found themselves isolated, their technology failing them for the first time in centuries. It was as though the very air of Earth was fighting back. Then, the deaths began. At first, it was subtle. A Zarnak captain collapsed on the bridge, no wounds, no signs of attack. His crew stared in disbelief, frantically searching for a cause. Moments later, another soldier fell, and then another. Panic rippled through the fleet. The technology they had always relied on was useless. They couldn't detect the threat, couldn't fight back. It was the same story from the battles on Zerus, the same inexplicable force. The Grim Reaper had arrived. One by one, the mighty Zarnak soldiers fell, their lifeless bodies strewn across the decks of their ships. The command center was in chaos, officers shouting orders that no one could follow. Some tried to retreat, to escape the planet's atmosphere, but it was too late. The Reaper was among them now, invisible and unstoppable. The legendary Zarnak fleet, which had once instilled fear across the galaxy, was crumbling under the weight of something they couldn't see or comprehend. From the surface, human leaders watched the chaos unfold. They had been prepared for a brutal battle, but what they witnessed was something else entirely. The Zarnak, so powerful, so feared, were being torn apart without a single human shot fired. No one understood how or why, but the Reaper was there, fighting on humanity's behalf once again. In desperation, the Zarnak commander ordered a full-scale retreat, but the damage was done. Entire ships were left adrift, their crews dead, their technology rendered useless. The survivors would never forget what they had seen, the force that had decimated their once unstoppable fleet. As they limped back into space, they knew the truth: the Grim Reaper wasn't a human weapon. It wasn't something they could defeat. It was death itself, and it followed humanity wherever they went. In the days that followed, the Galactic Coalition was left in disarray. The Zarnak had been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and they had been brought to their knees by an unseen enemy. The other species watched in fear, wondering if they would be next. Diplomatic channels buzzed with frantic messages, species scrambling to secure their alliances with humanity. No one wanted to risk invoking the wrath of the Reaper. Behind closed doors, human leaders convened. There was no celebration, no gloating over their victory. They knew they had not won this battle through military might or clever strategy. The Reaper had intervened, just as it had before. But what none of them could answer was why. Why did this force, this ancient embodiment of death, choose to protect them? Was it a manifestation of humanity's own belief in death, or something far older, something that transcended even their understanding? A senior human diplomat addressed the Galactic Coalition, his words careful and measured. "We do not control the Reaper," he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "It is not a weapon we wield. It is a force beyond our understanding, a reminder that death comes for all of us, no matter how advanced we think we are." His gaze swept across the assembly, landing on each alien delegate in turn. "We are not immune to it, any more than you are." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. The alien diplomats, once so arrogant in their immortality, now sat in stunned silence. They had always believed themselves to be beyond death, their technology ensuring them centuries of life, their regenerative abilities making them invincible. But now, they knew the truth. The Reaper had come for the Zarnak, and it could just as easily come for them. The human diplomat continued, his tone somber. "We have always lived with the knowledge of death. It is a part of our culture, our history, our understanding of the universe. You laughed at us for it, mocked us for fearing something you believed you had conquered. But death cannot be conquered. It can only be respected. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. We do not seek to rule this galaxy. We do not want to be feared. But understand this, the Reaper walks with us. And it decides who lives and who dies. The message was clear. Humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, now held a position of unparalleled power. Not because of their military strength or technological advancements, but because they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, the inevitability of death. And in that understanding, they had become the most dangerous species in the universe. As the meeting ended, the alien delegates departed in silence, their minds racing with the implications of what they had learned. No one spoke of war. No one mentioned conquest. The fear that had gripped them all was too real, too immediate. The Reaper was no longer just a human myth, it was a force that none of them could escape. Back on Earth, the human diplomat watched them leave, his expression unreadable. He knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed forever. They were no longer the weaklings, the fragile species that the galaxy had once laughed at. They were something else now, something far more powerful. But as he turned to leave, a single thought lingered in his mind. They had survived, yes. But at what cost?